to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, neurodivergent, ordained queerdo with a hyperfixation for all things symbolism, cycles, and patterns.
And I'm Moonkittee, a queer femme poly kitchen witch and proud geek. Today's topic is queer archetypes. Damona, what the heck do we mean when we're talking about queer archetypes?
Okay, well, let's start with archetypes. The word archetypes in itself is, I should have looked up a definition, but it's basically a part of symbolic language. Symbolic language is language or art that we use where a picture or a word can mean more than one thing or can have a deeper meaning.
Okay.
So archetypes are kind of like personalities or personas or traits that get personified a little bit. I don't know. Archetype kind of I think personification a little bit sometimes, but they're basically they bring a lot. An archetype can be like one thing but has deeper meanings.
Okay.
Or it could speak to a part of us. So queer archetypes are, there are so many different kind of symbolic, even labels or titles that we use to describe ourselves in the queer community. There are archetypes within stuff like tarot, and even numerology is so fascinating to me because each number has an archetype or personality behind it.
Okay.
So it's, again, so ascribing meaning and to a symbolism.
In the queer community, what are some of the primary archetypes that we think of when we think of a queer community?
Femmes, thems, daddies, mommies, butch, tops, bottoms, otters and bears. Oh my.
Okay, that makes sense. I think most of us have heard those kinds of phrases before. If you've been in the queer community before, you've heard the phrase a femme or a them or a daddy. Daddy is very common, especially if the subsect of the queer community that is also in, say, the leather that branches over, merges with the leather community. But
Truthfully,
those kinds of things.
Those are just scratching the surface.
That's true.
It is such a deep little rabbit hole that when we talked about this idea as a topic for a podcast, I was doing some research. I have really cool links that we'll share on our show notes.
Okay.
Because, yeah, there are, let's just say there's more queer archetypes than I even could think of off the top of my head. There's lipstick lesbian, there's like so many different ways of describing what kind of gay you are, what kind of lesbian you are, what kind of gender queer flavor you are. Like there's not just non-binary and the other binaries. There's also fluid or what was that one? Sliding gender. So there's like so many different archetypes and expressions. I will even say that we were talking about deities at one point, and there are also queer archetypes within some of the traditional deities. Now, did you envision them as queer when you first learned about them? Maybe not, but who's telling the story? But if you take the colonized heteronormative out of the storyteller and you look at some of these deities in past cultures, and you will find queer flavors of personality.
I'm looking at you, Dionysus.
Yeah, for me it was Hermes. Led me to the divine androgyny.
Okay.
The divine androgynon. And that was a whole revelation for me and a whole rabbit hole that Hermes has sent me down on, which has accumulated to me doing podcasts. So, but yeah, I told my therapist once that I had a really hard time connecting to the divine masculine when I'm fighting toxic masculinity in my daily life. And then Hermes popped up and was like, what about me? Because they're very shiny.
Yes.
Very peacock, right?
So with archetypes, so again, we talk about, it's like example, lipstick lesbian. So is that an archetype or is that a stereotype? Or is there a difference between the two?
Well, and that's a really great question and a really difficult distinction to make,
Okay.
because that also brings back to like, are these archetypes and or stereotypes harmful or not, right?
Right.
And I think in all things that we can't oversimplify, we can't
hmm
generalize. But I also say that some people find identity and expression and labels very comforting, so that they
hmm
can very much define who they are and what they're looking for.
Okay.
On a dating profile, how are you going to find your lipstick lesbian or your pillow princess if you don't write in that you're a stone butch looking for, you know what I mean?
Right. And it's so funny because again we think of these different things and I don't know about you, but to me it calls up a certain image in my mind and that can be so different um, than what the reality may be. Um,
100%. A lot of people assume that I am cis female because I like makeup.
mhm.
But for me, this is drag
Right.
on a non-binary person. So sure, you can call me she, her, you can use those pronouns, but in doing so, I know that I have you fooled into
hmm
believing my feminine persona that I like to express.
hmm
But people who really know me know that I identify as non-binary, and that they them are also pronouns that I love to have
hmm
addressed, to be addressed through,
hmm
because I do have a connection with my inner divine masculine, and I am very comfortable in the sliding back and forth, as well
hmm
as sitting in that androgyny. And like we were talking about before with that concept behind the upside down hierophant, I just like to shed
hmm
gender expectations
Yes.
and other expectations placed upon us based on arbitrary things that we have no control over. Which is why stereotypes are not acceptable, and
hmm
you do have to discern whether or not you're stereotyping people, or if you're. And I think honestly, one of the biggest things is, how are you using this term? Like
Right.
queer, for example, we've reclaimed that term, and I find it to be very powerful. But in the 90s, when I was in high school, that was an insult,
hmm
and that could mean you're going to get your butt whooped.
I
And
think back to, I don't want to interrupt you too much, but I think back to, we did several years ago, we did a seminar on queering the gods. And I remember an older woman who was of a different generation came in
I
and she
remember
saw,
this
you don't,
too.
she saw, I had to come in and hear because for me, queer was such an insult. It was so hard to hear. It was so thing that you're using it so blatantly and so differently and why and how. And it was just that sticks with me so much is these terms that were used before as slurs, how they have completely been reclaimed in the different community.
Yeah. So I think it's important to look at who is using these terms, why they're using
hmm
it, and are you letting people self-identify? Are you
hmm
letting people use these labels on themselves, or are you forcing them into a label that you've chosen for them versus what they would choose for themselves? So yeah, I think archetypes and identities can be weaponized.
hmm
Uh, but I also think they're everything has its benefit and its challenge.
hmm
But the benefit is that it's important for us to have words. And again, we talk about like how this newer generation has the words that we
hmm
didn't have in our teen years.
Yes.
And I'm using them, and I'm learning from them what these terms, how do they describe how I've always felt about
hmm
myself, but never really had language to express it.
hmm Or the language that was used was
Problematic, or
problematic. Yeah,
yeah,
I think that's the right word that I'm kind of
insulting.
thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, we're always trying to learn better, trying to take in and listen to feedback on all of that stuff too. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting on how different people have different reactions to some of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like for example, there's a difference between people who identify as an otter versus a wolf,
Okay,
and they
and
tend to
now
be like.
just for clarification purposes, what would be the stereotype of an otter or a wolf?
So you've got your bears, and bears are kind of like big, burly, and hairy. And you've got
Okay.
like your twinks, or there's another term. I went down some rabbit holes, and I've got links to share on our show notes for it. So twink or trunk, I can't remember, but they're like a thick twink,
Okay.
like a muscular twink. So those are the, like, kind of different body types, but also kind of different personalities. And in the middle, you have like these more average, kind of hairy, but usually groomed
Okay.
otters.
So like dad bod, groom dad bods.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And those are your otters. And then the wolves are like kind of like otters, but they're more muscular, or they kind
Okay.
of maybe have a different, maybe a different kind of personality expression, where the otters are very fun and playful. The wolves are kind of stoic and
Okay.
graceful. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of fun. Like there's a whole I have a whole link that talks about like the different animal definitions in queer terms. There's a link particularly about just the different lesbian terms, because there's so many
Hmm.
different nowadays. There's more than just butch and femme. you
Hmm.
know there's a whole spectrum of lesbian expression alone. So the other rabbit hole I fell down was hanky codes.
Okay.
How much
I
do you know about hanky code?
Well, I am a little bit familiar with the Hanky Code mostly through like the BDSM community, and flagging in them. It was never something that got really in depth. I was always intrigued by it, but I don't know much beyond that aspect of it.
It's a little from someone who's always on the outskirts of that community.
Hmm.
It's a little intimidating, but it actually, I think, well, so I found this really interesting website that kind of just would talk about the origins of hanky code, and here's the one that really fascinated me the most.
Hmm.
They theorize that some of the tradition of hanky code was pulled from the gold rush days. And
Oh,
that was
okay.
because back in the gold rush days, there wasn't a lot of women and they liked to dance. And so there would be the 49ers, or the miners, would wear a handkerchief in one way to show that they were going to lead, and another person would wear their hanky on the other arm or in a different way to symbolize that they were looking for a partner because they wanted to follow. So it
Hmm.
was like pairing up for dancing, who's going to lead and who's going to follow, if there's not these gender distinctions back in
Hmm.
our
Interesting.
very, very interesting gold miner origins of this state that we both live in. So they've theorized that the idea of wearing a hanky tied on one way symbolizing one thing and tied in a different way symbolizing another, they theorize can be traced. But then there's also the late 20th century, 80s, 90s, 70s, even 60s, 70s, when it was more on the DL. If
Hmm.
you were a friend of Dorothy,
Yes.
or you flagged, so that if you're in the know, people knew, and if you're not, you wouldn't think anything of it.
Right, because it was
uh
illegal. It was illegal to be homosexual for a very long time.
yeah. So hanky code did originate in the gay leather community as a way of kind of looking for connections, but not outing yourself to the wrong people.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, of course, because of this day and age in the internet world, it's evolved. And the thing that I find really fascinating is uh, it changes. It can change from region to region.
Okay.
And the hanky code can be considered different between, like, gay male leather versus like lesbian leather
Okay.
uh, codes or kink. So yeah, again, I have some links I'm more than happy to share if anybody wants to take some more rabbit holes. These came highly recommended. It was really fun to learn more about different ways and the history of ways that people sought connections, and how people still continue to use this way of kind of letting others know what they're into and what they're looking for. Are you looking for someone to bottom to you for this, that, or the other thing? Or are you looking to receive?
Hmm.
And there's different ways of just being able to, like, dress in a way that when you're going out, you can kind of know by a glance, like, oh, they're cute. Oh, they're a top.
Makes me think of all the flower language that used to be in Victorian times, where carnation symbolized one thing in a bouquet and lilies in another, and you could have whole conversations by exchanging flowers and everything else. It seems very similar in that kind of aspect. So it's something we've been doing for centuries, just in different forms.
That's symbolic language for you, man. Our human brains love symbolic language. We love it. We eat it up. I mean, I'm sure that those flower symbologies somewhere are on Oracle deck somewhere.
Oh yeah, I'd love to find it.
Victorian. Oh, and if not, let's make it.
Right. Yeah. Drop a link in the comments if you know of one that's existing. If not,
Right?
drop a link in the comments for the ones that you know, and we'll put together a deck.
Right? Yeah, I love
So,
symbolic language. That's why I love tarot, oracle,
mhm.
art. Just finding a message in what an artist is creating.
So
Yeah.
speaking of the tarot, what kind of queer archetypes do you think come up in the tarot or oracle or other divination techniques? I know we talk about tarot, but oracle is also just as much a valid, though there's some stigma against it. But again, it's who's stigmatizing who when it comes to that, because honestly, I think oracle decks are amazing and they offer just as much guidance in a different kind of perspective. It's like it's an affirmation versus a journey. It's a different kind of thing. You can't compare one or the other. It's apples and
Mm-hmm.
oranges. But they're
Mm-hmm.
both divination tools. So what kind of things come up in those kind of divination tools or techniques?
Well, so there's so much that can be said here, but I'll say for one, there's a particular card that comes up in one of my decks, and anytime it comes up, and I'm pretty sure it's the King of Cups, but I say, "Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy?" And so often, especially for one particular friend of mine, love you, Tori, he will come up, and I know it's speaking to their inner daddy, the Capricorn in them, right? The
Mm-hmm.
sun in Capricorn. But they have the daddy vibe from time to time. And I'm just like, hey, who's your daddy? You better start waking up that daddy archetype within you. Um, there are a lot of different archetypes, queer archetypes, you know, queen,
Mm-hmm.
drag queens is an archetype too. And you can the high priestess,
Mm-hmm.
there's, to me, I also think about play on words. So you pull a queen card, hey queen, that could be a drag queen vibe,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how you interpret them. There are tons of, again, it depends on how are you interpreting these cards,
Mm-hmm.
or how did the artist interpret these cards. But there
Right.
are all kinds of queer iconography and archetypes, and there are some that you're going to be drawn to more than others.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny going back to the King of Cups things. I once you said that, and I think you're referring to like I know the Mary L has a really distinct Hello Daddy King of Cups, but so does a
Yes.
couple of other ones. And once you said that, I keep thinking back to all of the Kings of Cups in almost every deck that I have. And yes, it's almost always a Hello Daddy kind of
I planted a seed
experience.
in your brain. I've just
Yes.
planted a seed in your brain, because now every time he comes up, you're gonna be like, hello daddy. Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of daddy energy being that kind of compassionate but stern, nurturing but strong persona, which doesn't necessarily mean masculine, but that kind of different
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of more disciplinarian kind of energy, I guess, than say a feminine,
Yeah.
mothering kind of
Oh,
energy.
well, so you bring up mothering, the nurturer, the Mother Earth
Hmm.
energy, the grounding nurturer of the three in
Hmm.
major arcana. But then I remember I was going to talk about the high priestess,
Hmm.
and
Hmm. That's right.
sometimes I think of her as the high priestess. So again, another play on words, right?
Right.
But she is the divine feminine that you don't f- with,
Okay.
and she would be uh kind of that stone cold lesbian
Okay.
that that's too cool to approach, like so intimidating, but in a like I really love you kind of way, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. But yeah, I mean, she's dark and mysterious, and even though she's feminine, she's not soft. That's
Mm-mm.
for number 3. She's number 2. That's a whole different kind of femme vibe.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would love to see like a whole tarot deck specifically based on queer archetypes, or turning the tarot archetypes, connecting them to their queer archetype. Because
That would be really fun.
I would wager to say that we could find a queer archetype for every card of the tarot.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be fun.
that would be fun. Oh, we have another a new
A,
queer witch project.
a new project coming soon.
Yeah, years in the
Soon.
making. Give me
Yeah.
time. Anyway, yeah. So there's this whole other ramble that I have about archetypes. If you
Okay.
would like to hear.
Yes, please. I'd love
Why I love archetypes so much.
to.
It kind of starts with this marrying what I know about like energy centers in the body
Okay.
and numerology. So a lot of people talk about these 7 main energy centers in the body that start at the spine, and then this, you have one here, all these places, and it goes up 7. And number 7 is the crown, And in numerology, the end of a numerology cycle is 9. So there's, to me, this imperfect disconnect, and though 7 is a very deeply divine number, it is also in numerology a self-spiritual, or I call it the hermit number in numerology, but it's a self-spirituality, whereas 9 is a holistic spirituality.
Okay.
A wider, I hope those, I'm going to start talking in woo here a little bit, because this is what I do. So hopefully you tell me if we're not following along, you stop me and we'll try to get
this is the witch part of the Queer Witch Project.
Exactly. This is what I do. I'm going to get into this. So in my brain, I'm like, okay, why do our personal energy centers stop at 7? And how do I reconcile that with the idea of there being completeness in the 9 cycle? And this is how I've envisioned it for myself. If it makes sense for you, great. If it doesn't, like, share, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you think.
Right.
So I imagine the 8th energy center is something that exists as the collective. I call it the collective subconscious.
Okay.
So it is the collection of human knowledge that can be shared from human to human, and
Akashic record.
And the internet is a living expression of that eighth energy center. So the fact that we can almost look up anything that we are curious about or would want to know on an internet search, which we didn't have 20 years ago, but we do now. I think that's a physical manifestation of this 8th energy center that we can phone line into energetically, and we can collect information that has been known on some level by some human somewhere in history. And 9 being the holistic completion, that is beyond knowledge. That's the mystery. That's the abyss. That's the stuff that we can't know. That tends to be the god realms or the deity realms, stuff that's a little bit beyond our reach, right? But I truly believe that there is the 8th energy center can be a conduit that we can connect to, that the 9th energies in the 9th energy center can also connect to, and can download we can download information. And I call these threads of spirit. Okay. They're like phone lines. Oftentimes we talk about picking up the God phone. Oh, Hermes is calling. What does he want from me? Make a podcast.
Right.
All right, dude. I'll try. Yeah. So that's the God phone. But it's also, connecting into these ideas of these archetypes, the symbolic language, all of that stuff, all that tarot, human journey of tarot, all of that stuff lives in this collective 8th energy that we send threads of spirit up to, or connect down from, what is spatial anyway, but, that we can throw out and connect to threads of spirit. And then I think with these threads of spirit, they have different personalities, different archetypes. They teach us different things. Like for me, obviously, I've always had a connection to the mother archetype. Even before I had kids, I was mommy in the friend groups. I was gonna
Mhm.
in my early 20s,
Mhm.
if friends were drunk and puking, I was cleaning them up and putting them in the bath. That
Mhm.
was just who I was, who I am.
Mhm.
And so I have the thread of spirit connected to the mother archetype. But that's not all of who I am.
Mhm.
I am so much more. We are all multifaceted. So I feel like we download from all of these different threads of spirit that we personally feel a connection to. And with those threads of spirit, we each of us weave a beautiful tapestry that is our soul, is our
Mhm.
spirit expression in this body at this time in this space. And when you connect with someone else, your threads of spirit and my threads of spirit, particularly the ones that we share in
Mhm.
common, like the high priestess, the mystic,
Mhm.
those are things we both identified within each other when we met.
Right.
We share those common threads of spirit, and then together our threads make a beautiful tapestry of what our connection is.
Mhm.
So I just envision these threads of spirit that have these archetypal information that we can download from the ether
Mhm.
net into our mental downloads, especially if you get quiet and you get connecting and you get your brain
Mhm.
meditating on that particular, what do I have to learn from the hermit archetype
Right.
this month or this year, or for whatever reason. Why do I keep pulling the tower card? What is
Mhm.
the tower archetype trying to tell me about my life right now? And we just sit with those one archetypes and get a download from them. But also we also make our personalities are woven of all of these different archetypes and all of these threads of spirit, and we make these beautiful pictures as a community,
Mhm.
of this tapestry of all of these different personalities. And that, to me, is a tapestry of queer archetypes.
Ah, I love it. I love it. I think that's a
That's my little ramble.
beautiful. I think it's amazing. I think it's a beautiful way of describing this kind of thing and linking it back to that idea of archetype, what it is, how it defines us, and again, the connection with other and how that plays out. I think it's just no, I think it's really pretty and really it helps make the idea of a queer archetype a little bit more sense. Makes a little bit
Yeah,
more sense that way.
they're kind of, sometimes they're like spirit guides for us. They're a
Hmm.
phone line that we pick up. We find our identity in some of them. We also shed our identity in letting go of some, like, for example, for so long you found identity in like the wife archetype, which
Hmm.
maybe someone like Hera would rule over, and then you realize that that was a then and not now, and
Right.
you shed that thread of archetype because you've been there, done that, and now you are moving on.
Hmm.
And sometimes we adopt an archetype later in life, like there's a lot of people who have always been neurodivergent but only get diagnosed or realize it later in
Hmm.
life, and or queer, and they only realize it. And so you're connecting to that thread that's always kind of been there but has been out of reach because it was ill defined or
Hmm.
not understood. So yeah, it's always an avenue to this really important thing that is knowing thyself
Hmm.
and permitting others to know themselves.
That's awesome. And I think that's probably a really good way to kind of end this discussion on archetypes.
That's a beautiful, yeah, thanks for joining us for queer archetypes, and I'm sure that we'll ramble about these things in future episodes as
Hmm.
well. But for now, I just want to say thank you guys for tuning in and listening to the Queer Witch Project. If you enjoyed this topic, please like, follow, subscribe, leave us a comment, tell us what you liked.
If there is a topic that you want to know more about or an episode topic you would like to suggest, contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle @queerwitchproject. We upload twice a month. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.